Shalom Aleichem, good night of Shabbos. Hayom Yom Shishi, today is Friday. And it's Yud Beis Kislev, the 12th day in the month of Kislev. It's 7 days before Rosh Hashanah L'Dach, Rosh Hashanah L'Chassidus. It's Kislev Habo Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael L'Teva V'Levracha B'Chol Makom Shehem. And I'm teaching a Mamer, Kedarki. On Fridays we do Mamer. The Shir is the Schus. Ilu Nishmas HaKodeš Tzvi Alexander HaKoyen Hashem Yimkim Dome and Moshe Yehuda ben Tzvi Yosef Rabbi Moshe Chatlarski Olav Shalom. It's Chutz for Shleimer for Meir Chaim ben Chayetzira and Liba Braine Bas Alta Miriam and Shleimer Yosef ben Risha Baruch Adasa Bas Gutken Chaim Mushka Bas Natal. Like I always say, I know these people, so it's not just a Misha Berach that someone says in Shul. It's a very living thing. And it makes me realize how serious every Misha Berach is and how personal every Misha Berach is. And we should bless all the Jewish people, all the brachas in the world, including the bracha of no fear, including the bracha which chaftam ve'ein macharid. Ve'ein macharid, not just there's no actual fear, there's no imaginary fear. And we should be zeichet to the gula shleima tekef miyad mamish. We should recognize the unbelievable miracles that are unfolding in front of our eyes as we speak in the world. And we see Mashiach coming. We see Mashiach coming with our eyes. It's just incredible. Let's just be safe and peaceful. And we should do our job. We should do our job. And our job is to teach the world about the Eibishter. Teach the world about the mitzvahs. Teach the world about Shavah mitzvahs b'nei. And in a kind of weird kind of way, we're in the middle of fighting a war. We should teach the world about peace. Because that's our business. Unfortunately, this Milchama is necessary, but it's ushering in, it's creating a framework for all these incredible miracles. They should continue. There should be minimal loss of life, no loss of life at all, chas v'shalom. And I'll tell you something. Rabbi Yudel Krinsky is farang the yeshiva for us. Many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, on Hey Tevis, Chamisha B'Tevis. And he told a story. I haven't seen him tell the story anyplace else. I haven't seen the quote, but this is what he said by us in yeshiva, that he went into the Rebbe in Tishrei of Tafshin Nun, when the entire case of the Sfarim was over. The entire case of it was all finished. And he told the Rebbe that it's over. I mean, I've seen other people say that it happened sometime in Tevis, but if I remember correctly, he said it was Tishrei. And it's all finished. There's no more appeals, there's no more complaint, it's done, finished. And the Rebbe said, Bazal Lashon. This is what he said to us. Ei bazei kemen gein sagen Chassidus. Zol zayin shalom in the ganze Welt, zol zayin shalom in Eretz Yisrael. Those were the words. If that's the case, we can go say Chassidus, which is, of course, the whole Sfarim thing is about saying Chassidus. Let there be peace in the whole world. Let there be peace in Eretz Yisrael. And at the time, it was really disturbing to me that the Rebbe said first peace in the whole world and then peace in Eretz Yisrael. So Lebish to helfen, am haltje ba shalom in Eretz Yisrael, kommt doch heis, am in Rabbi gegangen, the shalom b'chol ha'elam kule. So we should see it b'teva nirev ha'nigle. Amen. It's Friday we do Mamer. And I'm doing Basi Legani. I'm a little bit ahead of me. Usually I'll do Basi Legani after Yitas Kislev time, Chanukah time. But I had a little time, Mipnei Siba. And we're doing Basi Legani, Tafshin Chav Hey, 1965. Now I'm not making promises, but I do hope to redo Basi Legani Tafshin Mem Hey. I don't usually do it. I already have classes on Basi Legani Tafshin Mem Hey, but because, I remember the Rebbe saying those by Mamer. I was a big boy, I was 19 years old, and the Rebbe said some very, very powerful things in that Mamer. And I have classes online, which I gave in 770, but I'm thinking to do it again. No promises, but I'd like to. I'm going to try. That's a little bit part of the reason I'm ahead, because I have a little bit of an ambition here. So we're doing Basi Legani Tafshin Tezvav. Tafshin Chafei, pardon me, Perek Tezvav, right? Chapter 15 is Perek Tafshin Chafei. Now, Basi Legani, of course, as we all know, and by the way, I'm planning to do it in 4 classes. The first class is all the introduction. I'm being very nice to myself. The second and the third class are, so to speak, the body of the Mamer. And the final class, I think, is the point of the Mamer, the way I see it. But of course, I'm just a person. I'm just telling it to you the way I see it. Basi Legani is a Mamer which the Friedrich Rebbe said the first time in 1923, Tafshin Chav Gimel, Tafresh Pei Gimel, when the Rebbe, our Rebbe, visited Rostov. From what I understand, it wasn't his first visit, it was his second visit. And from the letters of the Rebbe, it's implicit that he came out for a shidduch. It was a chosen visit. The Rebbe was 20 years old at the time. The Rebbe Tzimchai Mushka was 21. And during that visit, on the Shabbos Saboy and Beshalach, the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe said a Maimon, 10 Perakim each week. The first 10 Perakim are the first two Maimarim of Basi Legani, the first 10 Perakim. And the next week, he said the next 2 Perakim, 10 Perakim of Basi Legani. Word for word. We have the Maimon now in print. In Tafshin Yud, as was the custom the last 5 years of the Friedrich Rebbe's life, after the Friedrich Rebbe's stroke, there were no new Maimorim. They took old Maimorim, the Rebbe and the Friedrich Rebbe. I'm not sure who did what part of it, but it was somewhere between the Rebbe and the Friedrich Rebbe. Old Maimorim were selected and reissued with small changes. The Rebbe added footnotes, the Friedrich Rebbe added summaries, kitzurim, and the Rebbe also changed the Dibur HaMaschal. The Maimon, as was said in Tafresh Pei Gimel, was Vahi Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, Tzivus Hashem. You can see the Ksaviyad Kodesh. You see the manuscript, the Ksaviyad, the handwritten Maimon, or maybe it was typed. And the Rebbe crossed out the first 10 or 12 lines. From Vahi Be'etzem Hayom says, L'hoven Zeyesh Lahagdim Tchila Mashakos Basi Legani. The Maimon begins Basi Legani. And for the record, we know where the Basi Legani comes from. There's a Maimon Basi Legani Tafresh and Ches from the Rebbe Rashab, which is very, very similar to the Basi Legani of the Friedrich Rebbe. It's almost word for word. And then in Tafresh Pei, Pashas Boy, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, there is a Maimon which is more or less the second half of Basi Legani. We see where the Friedrich Rebbe developed the Maimon from, and of course he added his notes and his commentary and his direction. The Maimon was given out officially because of the yahrzeit of the previous Rebbe's grandmother on Yud Shevat and the previous Rebbe's mother on Yud Gimel Shevat. That's the first 2 Maimorim. And then the last 2 Maimorim, one was for Purim and one was for Beis Nissen, which is the yahrzeit of the previous Rebbe's father. Then, of course, as the Rebbe writes in his Rishima, 10 minutes to 8, Shabbos Pashas Boy, Bey Yispayin, called the Hayden Yeloin, the Rebbe was nostalgic. It's Allah Hashamayma. So the Maimon Basi Legani became not the Maimon which was issued for the yahrzeit of his grandmother and his mother, became the Maimon of his Talkus, of Hilula, the Maimon of the Friedrich Rebbe. And the Rebbe would very often refer to it as the Friedrich Rebbe's Tzavah, Friedrich Rebbe's will. And there's multiple occasions in letters and in Sichas where the Rebbe says, if you have a question about how you should go your life, in the Basi Legani you have answers to all questions. And when people would ask the Rebbe questions, he would say, look, it says in Basi Legani this, and this is the answer to your question. It says in Basi Legani that, and this is the answer to your question, and so on. And Basi Legani became the mandate of our generation. There's no doubt that if you read the Basi Legani, you understand the Rebbe. I'm not saying that the Rebbe based his whole Messias on the Basi Legani, but the Basi Legani speaks about the Rebbe Tachtoinim, Ishtos the Kedusha, and the Skafi V'Hapche, and Tzivus Hashem, and Bizbez Ha'otzris, all of the things which we know, not as ideas, but as realities in our lives, over the Messias of the Rebbe, are written in the Basi Legani. And of course the Rebbe, his custom was that every single year, he would say a Maimon Basi Legani on Yud Shvat. He did it from Tafshin Yirav till Tafshin Memches. Derweile, we're expecting more. Mitzvah take us miyad mamish. And sometimes he said 2. There are even occasions when he said 3 times. And the way he did it was that he would speak on one Perek. In Tafshin Yirav, he spoke on Perek Aleph. In Tafshin Beis, he spoke on Perek Beis. In Tafshin Gimel, he spoke on Perek Gimel, and so on. So when he got to Tafshin Lamed, he completed it. So Tafshin Lamed Av, the Rebbe began again, and again he spoke on Perek Aleph. And this continued till a couple of weeks before the Rebbe Tzimchai Mushka passed away in Tafshin Memches. But the Rebbe continued to issue Maimorim. Tafshin Memtes, 1989, the Rebbe gave out the Maimon from Tafshin Chavtes Muga from 1969. And in Tafshin Nun, 1990, the Rebbe gave out the Maimon from Tafshin Lamed, 1970 Muga. And in Tafshin Nun Av, 1991, the Rebbe gave out the Maimon from Tafshin Lamed Aleph, 1971 Muga. And in Tafshin Nun Beis, 1992, the Rebbe got the Maimon from Tafshin Lamed Beis, 1972, edited Muga. So the Rebbe encouraged us to continue learning Basi Legani, cycle 3. So cycle 3 went from 1991, Tafshin Nun Aleph, till Tafshin Ayin, 2010. And then we started a 4th time. And now we're holding the 15th Perek into the 4th cycle. And I try every year to teach Basi Legani. In other words, although we're learning all the Mamerim of the Rebbe, but I try to teach the Basi Leganis in the kind of way that I make them available to people. In the last few years, I've had both my Mamerim available. There's an organization. Every year, a guy makes a website called Basi Legani, something or other. And he posts many different shurim. He posts my Mamerim as well. So we're learning the Maimon Tafshir Chafei in preparation of Basi Legani, round 4, chapter 15. So what is Basi Legani about? Basi Legani is a mandate. It's an instruction. And basically the mandate consists of 2 parts. What the job is and who must do the job. The job is iskafia v'ishapcha. The job is the transformation of shtus del yom hazeh into shtus del kedusha. The job is to transform the sheket of elam hazeh into keresh and to keshet. The job is to elevate the world, not by staying away from the world, but by engaging with the world and fixing it. Fighting with the world and transforming it. That's Basi Legani, it's first step. That starts in Perek Aleph and continues more or less till Perek Tes. Then the second part of the job is who is meant to do it, and the answer, of course, is the Tzivos Hashem, the army of Hashem. And that's the second half of the Maimon, the role of the Tzivos Hashem. The Tzivos Hashem, the army of Hashem. And this is us, Yidden. We're the Eibishter's army, and of course you know what the Chassidus says. At the highest madrega of Avodas Hashem is a Eved Pashut, a simple slave who serves his master. But there's one person who in one way is even higher than the madrega of an Eved Pashut. And that's a Chayal Pashut, a simple soldier. The difference between an Eved Pashut and a Chayal Pashut is the Yinam Mesidus Nefesh. A simple soldier, a simple servant does whatever his master tells him. But he's not ready to give away his life. A soldier is a Yinam Mesidus Nefesh. The idea of a Chayal, of a soldier, is Mesidus Nefesh. He gives himself away to the Eibishter completely. And Tzivos Hashem, the army of Hashem, are soldiers who are, in the Lashon of the Rebbe Rashab, Yetzel Mechamet's Beis David. They've been selected or they volunteered to go out to fight the war for bringing Mashiach Tzidkenu. And in order to fight this war, you have to have ready. You have to be prepared to give away. You call Yetzel Mechamet's Beis David. Get Krisis case of L'Ishta. You have to be prepared to give away all Yonim Gashmiim to fulfill that purpose, that mission. That's what Taim Chatmimim is, and that's what the Basi Legani speaks about, the Tzivos Hashem. And in speaking about the Tzivos Hashem, the Rebbe explains the idea of Milchama, of a war. And he says there's different kinds of wars, and the most intense and intent kind of war is what's called Milchemes Nitzachim. Milchemes Nitzachim means a war you must win. It's not a war for conquest, it's not a war with consideration, it's a war for principle. And then one of the Maimorim that we learned in the last couple of years, the Rebbe says that when it comes to Milchemes Nitzachim, it has to be exactly the way the king wants it. You can't get 20% or 50% or 70% or 80% or 90% or even 95% of what the intended target goal is. It has to be perfect, it has to be complete. That's one of the ideas that Rebbe mentions in one of the Maimorim Basi Legani. A Milchemes Nitzachim, a war where the outcome has to be to win, you can't lose, is principled. And when it's principled, so to speak, you pull out all the stops. So the Rebbe explains that when a king fights a Milchemes Nitzachim, he breaks his own rules. And he does things that under normal conditions, even under normal conditions of war, he would not do. Number one, Machnis Atzmei B'Tachsisei Milchama. He personally engages in the tactics of war. He doesn't trust his generals, which is what kings normally do, what they're meant to do. But he personally engages in he personally invests himself in the war to see to it that the war should be won. He literally engages in the tactics, in how the how-to of the war. And to apply this to our generation, the Friedrich Rebbe in America and the Rebbe's Lagazans and our Rebbe put themselves into teaching children alibis and literally keeping people from Shmad. We're not talking about high levels and deep levels. We're talking about a Jew marrying a Jewess, literally. This became their mission. Instead of being involved in Chabad, they're involved in that also, but time is a limitation. And spreading Chassidus and teaching people Avodah Pnimis, which is what Chabad Rebbeim did the Rebbe and the Friedrich Rebbe, once they came to the United States of America, it became their mission to concern themselves with Kometz Alafah. It's the ultimate example of Machnes Atzma Machtisisi Milchama. The Rebbe went away from a Yodim that a Rebbe is supposed to do, which is what nobody else can do. In Yodim Pnimi Matzim, the deepest thing. And he got involved in the simplest things, because this is a Mechames Nitzachim. And in a Mechames Nitzachim, in a war that has to be won, the king has to personally involve himself. Now, I'm not a mensch was kriegt in Heiche Fenster. I'm not one of those people who creeps where I'm not supposed to go. But I've heard from people who know that the degree to which the Rebbe was personally involved in the work of shlichus, of individual shluchim and individual projects, individual ideas, individual initiatives, is absolutely mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. There was nothing too small for him. It's reingelegt in dem Ganzen. What you read, Machnes Atmut Achsisi Milchama, this is not a philosophical truth, it's an actual Matthias. The Rebbe every day would not just answer questions, but he would look over circulars and flyers and pay attention to every detail of the work of the shluchim and give them guidance and direction. And the most important thing is he was behind them in all of the little details. As I'm talking, I'm thinking of that story that Rabbi Darren, Yisrael Darren Zogazunzain tells about his first year on campus, where he was planning a concert and there was 76 tickets sold. And he was so broken. And on Shabbos afternoon, he had a conversation with the Rebbe, like in a Mendel Futterfass. That's what he tells the story. And then Sunday, 1,000 people showed up. And the next night, his Bubba was in Yechidus, Rabbi Shalom Posner's Rebbetzin. And the Rebbe asked her many questions about the event. And then the Rebbe said, the Rebbe said, Yisrael was so worried. He hadn't sent the Rebbe any letters. The Rebbe knew it because the Rebbe knows and feels and hears. The Rebbe heard his anguish, and the Rebbe said to his grandmother, he didn't say to him, he said to his grandmother, he was so worried. And this is just an echad mini elef of this idea of the melech is machnes etzasma v'tachsisi Muhammad. He gets personally involved. That's what you do in a Muhammad's nitzach. That's number one. And number two is mizvazbeis kol ha'etzreis asher otzru aveisav aveisav. You take treasure, which has been collected over generations, and it's a secret. It's not meant for dissemination. It's not meant for publication. And you give it out, give it away. And you give it away in a way which is almost reckless. Why? Because when you have to win a war, there's no other considerations. There's just no other considerations. You have to win the war. And you give away treasure that becomes so devalued by the virtue of the fact that you're exposing it and disposing of it, giving it away. But when you have to win a war, you pull out all the stops. There's no limits. There's no limits whatsoever. There's no limits. There's no limits. There's nothing you don't do to win a war. And of course, this is another thing which, of course, we see in our generation, that the Torah of Rabbi Seidin Nesiyenu, from the Alter Rebbe till the Rebbe, which the Rabbeim kept with great Mesiras Nefesh in manuscript, in the last 40 years particularly, has been given away. Hundreds of volumes of Chassidus have been published over this time from all the Rabbeim. We have the majority of the Maimorim of the Chabad Rabbeim, and maybe you could even say the vast majority, in print today. And as little as half a century ago, it was a fraction, a small fraction of that. Mamish. This is the bizbuz ha'etzis, the giving away treasure. And of course, part of this giving away of treasure is that we don't even have the ability to appreciate what we have. We do not even have the ability to appreciate how incredibly special it is that all these Maimonides Chasidus are just out for anybody to take and learn. And as an aside, the Rebbe's of Gezunza and our Rebbe, when he would meet Gedolei Yisrael, aside from the Chassidim, aside from the Litvische, Mestam Sfardim also, but I don't know, the Rebbe would ask them if they're ksavim, if there are manuscripts from their Zaydis, from their ancestors. And very often they would be told, yes, we have ksavim, but it's not our minig to publish. The Zaydah was to keep it secret. And the Rebbe would say, you kept it secret for so long, it's a different world. And in this world, if you're not going to give it out, no one's going to have it, it's going to get lost. And they should publish. And there were many Gedolei Yisrael, many Rebbes, many Tzaddikim, who took the Rebbe's advice and broke from the tradition of not publishing, and they did it. They did what the Rebbe suggested. And the Rebbe is a smart guy, and he's also a holy guy. And it's not that he doesn't care. The Rebbe just understands that now is the time to give the treasure, because when holding the treasure served the purpose that it needs to serve, it was the right thing to do. But when holding the treasure no longer serves the purpose of holding the treasure, the Rebbe says, now you got to give it away. Because that's how you win the milchama. That's how you win the war. And the last thing is, he throws his own life away in winning the war. And of course, you know that in Tafshin Yud in 1950, there's a sikha where the Rebbe actually said that it says in the Mamer 3 things. And the Rebbe said, the fact that the Rebbe Ayatz was nostalgic was the even Mashlach Chayiv Meneged, and now Mashiach has to come. We're 70 years on, 75 years on. It's genug, ad Mosai, mahalt by the Gula Shleim. But in any case, this is the second half of Basi Legani. The warriors of the war are called the Tzivis Hashem, and the war is fought, first of all, by the direct involvement of the Melech. The king personally involves himself in the Milchama, and he gives away the treasure, and he throws away his life. And the Rebbe Ayatz, the Friedrich Rebbe, discusses at length the middle of these 3 things. The idea of Mashach Atzma Redachtisim Milchama is pretty brief. The idea that Mashlach Chayiv Benegev is pretty brief. But the idea of Bizbas HaOitzes dominates the second 10 Perakim of Basi Legani. There's a long discussion about what the Oitzer is, and also very importantly, as you see in all the Maimarim, and you'll see it of course towards the end of Basi Legani, that the king gives it away to the Sari HaChayil, he gives it to the generals, P'kidei HaChayil. But he gives it to them for the Ish Chayil Poshet. The real end purpose of the Bizbas HaOitzes is the soldier on the front, the simple soldier on the front. That the Bizbas HaOitzes, which is given to the P'kidei HaChayil, is for the Anshe Chayil. That's what the Friedrich Rebbe says in his Mamer, clearly in the later Perakim, and the Rebbe of course repeats it every year, come out, that the end game of the Bizbas HaOitzes is that the simple soldier on the front should have this treasure, to use it to win the Milchama. The Milchamas Nitzachon, there has to be one. And bring the Yisrael, so Melech HaMashiach, the King to take it from Yad Mamish. So that dominates the second half of Basi Legani. The second 10 Perakim of Basi Legani are dominated by the Inyan of Eitzres. So chapter 12 actually begins with the words, Ulahaven Inyan HaEitzer Lamayla. That's how it begins. We must understand the idea of treasure as it applies on high, Lamayla, by the Eibshter. And in order to explain Eitzer, he says, Yesh lahagdil tchila mashakasa b'tikun Yezer. He quotes a Zeir. That the Zeir says, Ein seif, Lamayla, Mayla, Adein Kates, Lamata, Mata, Adein Tachas. Godliness is Lamayla, Mayla, Adein Kates. It's high and even high beyond an end, and Lamata, Mata, Tachas, and low and even low beyond the purpose. And of course, you're talking about godliness, you're not talking about God. But if you remember the Mamer from Chav Beis, from 4 years ago, it's this, from 1962. 3 years ago, I guess it is. Where did Rebbe talk about it ain't safe? Godliness. You understand that godliness is God. Godliness is not the apple pie. Godliness is the Eibishter, but as the Eibishter as he's presented. That's how I like to say. Godliness is God interactive. The Eibishter as the Lashon Rambam Motzei Rishon rather than Einei Motzei. Available to us. And there's one of the biggest discussions, not one of the biggest discussion in all of Chassidus is Lahal and Inyan Safe, to understand the concept of Elokus of godliness. And the Zayar says that Elokus has 2 components, 2 ideas. Lamayla Adein Kates, Lamata Adein Tachas. In other words, by Hashem you can't say character traits. By Hashemliness you can say 2. That as low as you go, he's lower, and as high as you go, he's higher. As high as you go, godliness is higher. As low as you go, godliness is lower. And the Friedrich Rebbe explains each one separately, but he reverses the order, as the Rebbe said in last year's Basi Legani, Tafshin Chav Dalet. First, he speaks lamata mata dein tachlis, the idea that godliness is revealed everywhere, and then he moves on to the idea of lamai lamai dein kates, means that as high as you go, godliness is beyond what you know. As high as you're going to go, there's more. It's higher. And the Rebbe actually said in the Mamer of Basi Legani Tafshin Chav Dalet, which we learned last winter, that the reason the previous Rebbe reverses it is because lamata mata dein tachlis is a segue to lamai lamai dein kates. It's a lower idea, and it sets up the lamai lamai in order to understand what it means. that l'mayla dein case, no matter how high a person goes, godliness is even higher. He first explains the lamata mata dein tachas, no matter how low one goes, even into klipa, even into the klipa of Ye'er Liv and Yasisini, there's the Eibishter there also. Imetzak shamayim, shom ota vatzia sheli neka. Wherever you're going to go, you're going to find the Eibishter even at the lowest madregas. Godliness is revealed everywhere. And after he explains that godliness is revealed everywhere, he explains that godliness is revealed nowhere. That no matter how much you know, you don't know. So chapters 12, 13, and 14, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, and Yud Daled, which we learned the last 3 years, Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, Chav Beis, Mamer of Tavshin Chav Beis, Tavshin Chav Gimel, Tavshin Chav Daled, the Rabbi explained Lamata Mata Dein Tachlis. The idea that godliness is revealed everywhere. Now we're learning the Lamai Lamala Dein Kates, that no matter how high you go, godliness is higher. And this is Perek Tezvav. And it seems to me that the truth is that the real Inyan Lamai Lamala Dein Kates is going to be next year, Tezayin. I looked through the Perek and also the Mamer from Chavav. The sugya of Lamai Lamala Dein Kates begins here. And L'cha'oira, it continues next. I'm saying L'cha'oira because officially, when you look at the Maimah from the Frierdiker Rebbe, next year is already a summation. It's a conclusion of both together. But there are oisias about Lamai Lamala Dein Kates in the Maimah of next year that we don't have in this year. If I may, I want to tell you how I see Perek Tezvav and Perek Tezayin. What the previous Rebbe is doing is explaining Elokus, godliness. And he's basically saying that godliness has two opposite characteristics. The two opposite characteristics that summarize godliness are everybody knows it and nobody knows what it is. Everybody has it and no one has a clue. And it's that combination which gives you an appreciation of what Elokus is. Lamata mata and tachas means he's everywhere. Lamai Lamad and Kate means he's nowhere. And in the last 3 years, we focused on the he's everywhere. This year, and the next year, if I'm correct, we're focusing on the idea that he's nowhere. Nobody knows. But there's a very big difference between the Mamer we're going to learn now, at least most of it, and the Mamer we're going to learn next year. Because the Mamer we're learning now is going to speak about Lamai Dein Kates by talking about the idea of Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means that in order for there to be a world, the Eibush has to evacuate from the world, or from the space of the world, godliness. In other words, Lamai Dein Kates speaks primarily to the idea that Hashem is hiding from us. And he's going to argue, like it says in Sharichet Ve'emunah, Hein Gvoreisav, that just as Hashem's ability to reveal himself is infinity, Hashem's ability to hide is also infinity. Just like there's an Ein Sofius to HaGodel, there's an Ein Sofius to HaGibet. Just like there's an infinity to the idea that Hashem is revealed everywhere, there is an infinity to the idea that Hashem is able to hide. Nobody could hide like the Eibishter can. Basically, that's Yesh Me'ayin. Hashem could influence an entire environment and leave no trace whatsoever of his presence. He's ayin, he's unknown, unknowable. And that's the taich hein of the infinite ability of the Eibishter to conceal himself. And that infinite ability to conceal himself is the inyan of Lamai Dein Kates in this Perek. So the Rebbe is going to explain that in the hiddenness there is God. In the hiddenness there is God. But if I understand this Maimah, the Maimah we're going to learn this year, correctly, the point of the Maimah is going to be that the Ein Seif Lamai Dein Kates is Hashem's ability to hide himself. Next year, Perek Tezayin, the Rebbe is going to add something else. Again, I think. Where the Rebbe is going to talk about the concept of the godliness of hiddenness. Not the godly power to hide, but the godliness of hiddenness. Those are very different things. The godly power to hide is about removing himself. The godliness of hiddenness is about the idea that there is a form of godliness that nobody can know. They're very, very different things. And lani is daiti, and I say this with much trepidation, much hesitancy. But you must understand, I'm not sitting down to talk to you in a vacuum. I learned this Mamer a few times. I've been busy with Legani for a couple of weeks already. And I learned the Friedrich Rebbe's Mamer. I looked ahead, I glanced through the Maimorim a little bit from the Rebbe, from the later years. And I'm caught of Levade, I'm almost certain that what I'm saying now is accurate. That in Perek Tezvov, the Rebbe speaks about L'mayla and Kate in terms of Hashem hiding himself. And in Perek Tezayin, he's going to add, in addition to the idea of L'mayla and Kate, means the Abish's ability to hide, it's the idea that there is godliness in hiddenness. There's the hiddenness of godliness. There's a madrega of alakus, which is etzem, which is Helen. The second idea, which we're going to be learning next year, is arguably a deeper idea. But already this year, even in this Perek Tezvav, the Rebbe is going to make it very clear that L'mayla Adein Kate is deeper than L'mata Adein Tachlis. The idea of the hiddenness of godliness is considered deeper than the revelation of godliness. And that is Oitzer Ha'elyon, which is the point of this expose, right? The Friedrich Rebbe starts in Perek Beis L'hov Inyan Eitzel L'mayla. It didn't say L'mayla Adein Kate, L'mata Adein Tachlis. The reason he's giving us this whole discussion is he wants to explain to us what it means treasure, the divine treasure. And the end is going to be that the divine treasure is godliness, but specifically the divine treasure is the concept of godliness which is concealed and hidden. And the concept of godliness which is concealed and hidden is the L'mayla Adein Kate, not the L'mata Adein Tachlis. The concept of godliness which is revealed is wonderful, but it's not the treasure. The treasure is what's hidden. And what's hidden is broken up into two ideas. That he's hiding from us, and his presence in a hidden state. That he's hiding from us is the dominant discussion in chapter 15, in the Mamer of Tafshich Afei, which is sitting in front of me. And the godliness of hiddenness, which will be learned next year. And then, of course, in Perek Yitzayin, chapter 17 and 18, the Rebbe is going to begin discussing the conclusion, that this is the treasure. And then, of course, whom the treasure is given to, it's given to the Anshe Pekidi Achal, for the Anshe Achal, like I mentioned in my introduction. So it took us 33 minutes and 31 seconds to begin to learn the Mamer. What I just did in this last half an hour was I introduced Basi Legani. I gave you an overview of Basi Legani, and I brought you up to speed about what this Mamer is about. They were talking about Elikus, 18 Seif. And Elikus is defined by Kabbalah, by Zohar, as having two characteristics. Being everywhere and being nowhere, unknown. This class, this Mamer, begins a discussion on the second idea, the idea of godliness being unknown. And if I am not incorrect, and of course it's very possible that I am, it's broken up into the two topics of chapters 15, which talks about Hashem's hiding, and chapter 16, which is about the Hashemliness of hiddenness, godliness in a state of Helen, which is a deeper idea. And that's going to be Otzar. So here we go. The Abish says to the Jewish people, I have come back to my shelter, to my garden, my sister, my bride. Yidna called the Abish the sister, and Yidna called the Abish the Kala. And I find it fascinating that from what I remember, that Rebbe never in his Maimorim explains the two Lashonos of Achesi and Kala. The Pasuk, right here in the very beginning of the Mamer. What's the difference between Achesi and Kalosi? As far as I know, the Rebbe never talked about the difference between being the Abish the sister or being the Abish the bride. Kabbalistically, a sister is Zah, and Kala is Malchus. But I have never seen a Basi Legani that touches on this point, that when Hashem is talking to us, he addresses us by two titles, Achoisi and Kala. And Hashem says to the Jewish people, I've come back. I was here, I left, and I came back. So Meivi Ba'ala Ilula Mamer Medesh, the Friedrich brings the Medesh, which explains the pshat in this pasuk. Legani means to my shelter. And it says, which means Legnuni. Legani means to my garden, and the Medesh translates to my shelter. Now, of course, the Lashon that's brought in the first Mamer is Legan En Ksiv Kan. Elo Legani. It doesn't say to our garden, it says to my garden. And the Rebbe translates it L'mokem Shahay Iki B'tchil. The fact that it says Legani and not Legan proves that he was here originally, and then he left and he came back. Hashem says to Jewish people, I was once on earth, I left and I returned. The Ikeshchina B'tachtoinim Hois, when the Eibishter created the world, and Adam Achav were living on Eden, loved all the Shamra. The Eibishter was also on earth. The earth was a Mokam of water. The earth was already clarified. There was Achar Abirur. Klipa was B'tachtas Asiyah. And the Eibishter was wandering around Gan Eden with Adam and Chav. And then the other Marishan didn't have a chet. And see, the Gazashchini caused the Shechina to go away. Min ha'aras l'rakia, from the earth to the first heaven. Now, of course, when you read the Chumash, the impression that you get is that Eibush kicked Adam Marishan out of Gan Eden. When you learn the Medrash, you get the opposite impression. Then what does it mean he kicked Adam Marishan out of Gan Eden? The Adam Marishan and the Eibush could not be in the same world, because the world became a Taruvas Teva as a result of the Chet, and the Eibush went up. So the divorce of Adam from Gan Eden is spatially not that he was physically made to leave Gan Eden, but the Eibishter couldn't stay with him. So he was divorced from the Eibishter because the world changed, and the Eibishter went to a different place. Then the subsequent generations, there were another occasions where people transgressed in this Nakadosh Baruch Hu, the Stalka, Shechina B'Rekia, the Shechina kept departing more and more, Ad Rekia Shvit to the seventh heaven. Then came righteous people of Elam, the fathers of this world, which means Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, Levi and Kohos and Amram and Moshe. They began to bring the Shechina back down from the seventh heaven where it had departed to, towards the earth. Till the seventh came with Moshe Rabbeinu. And of course, all seventh are most beloved. Now the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mamer, the words Kol Hashvin Chvivin are in a parenthesis. And in our Rebbe's Mamer, it becomes the foundation of the whole Mamer, the Infant Day Rashvi, like the Rebbe spoke on the first occasion of Basi Legani. Then he brought it down another kia from the heaven, la'odas to the earth. This was the Eibish's intent. That the Shechina should be b'tachteinim l'makom shoi ikri b'tchila, where he was originally. So there's a kvetch here. And the kvetch here is the word kavana. Kavana means the entire purpose of the creation was that the Eibishter should be on earth. He was here. We kicked him out through our misdeeds, but he couldn't stay away because the kavana was that he has to be here. Save, kol save. The Eibishter made a world with a purpose, and the purpose is Yidden and Tatum mitzvahs and Dir b'tachteinim, and it has to happen. And the beginning of it is the Basi Legani. So this is a medrash that tells a story, and the story here is that Hashem says, "I was here, I left, and I returned." He was here because the world was able to hold him. He left because the world was not able to hold him. He returned because by Matan Teira Paskazu Amasam, the world became fixed, and he was able to be here. Which of course leads to a very, very fundamental and basic question, which is Maida Hava Hava, let bygones be bygones. The Torah doesn't tell stories just for the sake of telling stories. It has to be a message. It has to be Hero, Torah Lashon Hero. The story of Basi Legani, the way we just related it, is exactly that. It's a story. He was here and he left and he came back. Thank you very much. Next. What is in it for me? And of course the answer is very obvious. The answer is that Hashem's coming back to this garden, to this world, is only a beginning. It's only a beginning. We have to expand the Basi Legani to encompass the entire world. Now, different Maimorim give you different angles. Different Maimorim give you different angles. Some Maimorim say that when the Eibishter came back to this world, the plan was that we have to expand the whole world and make it into his home. Other Maimorim say that when he came back, he was taking the whole world until Chet Egel, which was 40 days after Matan Teira. And by Chet Egel, Chazah, whatever schmutz was here, came back. But the Eibishter said, "Now I'm not going away. Not the second time. The first time you kicked me out, I left. Now I'm not leaving." And therefore the Eibishter said, "Vasili Mikdash, make me a house. I can't live in the streets because the streets are dirty. I can't live in your homes because your homes are not sufficiently clean. Give me my own space." So whichever approach you take, that the plan was originally, as soon as Matan Teira happened, that we should build the Beis HaMikdash. The three shittas about the Beis HaMikdash, about the Mishkan. Whether before the Chet Egel the plan was that we should build him a Mishkan, or as a result of Chet Egel the plan was to rebuild him a Mishkan, in both cases there's a job for us. Basi Legani is not a story. It's a stage setter. Hashem was here, Hashem left, Hashem came back. But when he came back, he's only in a house. Only in one place, a tiny space. And of course, like the halach is, we learned that yesterday's Rambam was about Eglarufa. Yerushalayim cannot make an Eglarufa because it was not meant for people to live in. It was Hashem's house. The Beis Hamikdash is Hashem's house, the Yerushalayim is Hashem's city. Nobody, he lives by himself. Alein, Einan Alein. So they wish to return, that he has a house. And the message is we have to make the whole world his home. So Basi Legani is not only a story, it's a mandate. He was here and he left. He came back and he's in a house, can't be in the streets. Right? I always think of the Malachim. They told Leit, Barchoiv Nolan, sleep in the streets, said, no, bad idea. The Eibishter comes into this world, Barchoiv Nolan. The whole world is his. He says, no, I need a little house with walls. And it's the avoid of a yid to expand that house to encompass the whole world. And that's Basi Legani. Basi Legani is not a story, it's a mandate. That Hashem is here, but he's limited to a tiny space, Kvayochel in Mokim. The Gilui of Elokus is limited to a tiny space in Mokim. And it's our job to make the whole world a seat for that presence of the Shekhinah to be revealed. That's our avodah of Basi Legani. And that's the message of Deir HaShvi. The message of Deir HaShvi is we have to expand the Beis HaMikdash to be the whole world. And there are two psukim that the Frierdiker Rebbe brings to support that idea. Two psukim. The first pasuk is right here now, Tzadikim Yishkinu L'ad Aleha. So Tzadikim Yishu Oris V'Yishkinu L'ad Aleha. And the second one is the pasuk from the Chumash, V'Aseh L'Mikdash V'Shechanti B'Seichel. I want to point out that in the Mugdika Mamer from Tafshin Chavches 1968, which came out in Tafshin Memches 1988, which is Perek Yud Ches of the Mamer, the Rebbe says that these two psukim, Tzadikim Yishu Oris Yishkinu L'ad Aleha and V'Aseh L'Mikdash V'Shechanti B'Seichel, are two steps. V'Aseh L'Mikdash V'Shechanti B'Seichel is building the Beis HaMikdash, and this is done be'ikit with Tzadikim. And Tzadikim Yishu Oris Yishkinu L'ad Aleha is the karbanas that are brought in the already existing Beis HaMikdash, which is done by you and me. And you should know that both of these psukim are in the Medrash. The Medrash, Rabbi, Memkoimai, V'Isam is Rabbi Memkoimai brings this idea of Ikar Shechinah B'Tachteinim Ha'isa, that the Shechinah left, now the Shechinah came back, and brings two psukim. And the Rebbe holds that the pasuk V'Aseh L'Mikdash V'Shechanti B'Seichel is about the building of the Beis HaMikdash, which is done primarily through Tzadikim. Tzadikim means Meisha Rabbeinu V'Kayetze B'Zeh. And then the second pasuk, Tzadikim Yishu Oris V'Yishkinu L'ad Aleha, goes on us. That once the Beis HaMikdash is built, we serve Hashem within it. We bring karbanos within it. But here, the Rebbe brings the psukim in the reverse order. First bringing the pasuk, which is negeah to, according to the Mugad Dikamayim from Chavches, what we do in the Beis HaMikdash, and then the pasuk about building it. It's a shtickle kasha, but it's only a shtickle kasha. There's two psukim that support this idea. That Basi Legani is not just a story, but it's a mandate, and the mandate is we have to build a Beis HaMikdash for the Eibishter in the whole world, not just in one space on Har HaMediyah. And the first raya is the pasuk Tzadikim Yishkunu L'ad Aleha, Tzadikim bring the Shekhinah back into this world. Hainushenyon and Vavidasam Shal Tzadikim, which is Amech Kulam Tzadikim, the job of Tzadikim, which means every single Jew. His last is Dir Leis Bara B'Tachteinim, to make this entire world home for HaKadosh Baruch. Through our work of bending and transforming klipa, it causes a Gilui, manifestation of godliness in a way which is uniform in all the worlds. The glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'kula alma in all the world. Hainu, in the lashon of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimon is Shemei Eru Mizgala Eir HaSeiv of Kalam, and reveals the level of godliness which is called Seiv of Kalam. And of course, in the very first Basi Legani, the Rebbe says that although the previous Rebbe says Seiv of Kalam, and it actually means something which is much higher than Seiv. Shazehu Yikara the Kuchabrichu, that Seiv of Kalam is the idea of the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's b'kulu alma b'shavet, and all the world is the same. The koyal era Seiv of Kalam, it's an allusion to the light of Seiv of Kalam, which is Meir b'chola elam is b'shava. It radiates in all the worlds equally, ube'efet shalistalik, in a way that it's available b'raimamus. It's hidden but not hidden. It's not adapted to each world. It is what it is, but it's available for us if we want to take it. That's the first raya. That Basi Legani is not just a story, but an instruction. And the instruction is to continue the Hashem being in this world, which began again by Matan Torah when the Basi Legani occurred, that Hashem should live in the whole world, in the streets. And the second pasuk is, make me a sanctuary, live in it. First of all, it means the sanctuary, which is called by the name Shechina, and it's called by the name Kedusha. Mishkan is Shechina, Kedusha is Mikdash. And of course the Gemara says, Mishkan the Ikri Mikdash and Mikdash the Ikri Mishkan, they're both in Yonim. The lower Madreg is Mishkan and Shechina. The higher Madreg is Mikdash and Kedusha. But V'gam B'teich, not only does it mean that the Eibush is resting in the base of Mikdash, but he's resting in the hearts and minds and in the bodies and in the homes of every single one of us. The whole world is made into the Eibush's home. Like it says in the Chazal, and of course Chazal over here means Achreinim B'teich Alechad V'echad Mi'Yisrael. Look in footnote 12, you see the Makaitis. The Rebbe says Amru Chazal, even though it's not a Chazal, it's from the Al-Sheikh and other Achreinim, it's Amru Chazal, Hashem wants to live in the hearts and minds of every single Jew, and the homes and bodies of every single Jew. Shehem, that the Yidden are Elu, Shemashkinim, Hainu Mamshichim, they cause the Shechina, which is the bringing down of Shechinasa Yizbarach, the Shechina Kvayachal Lamat into this world. Now, of course, I don't understand why the Rebbe reverses the Seder of the Psukim. L'chayda, first you build a house, and then you move into it. And first he brings the Inyan of Yishkun al-Adaleh, and then he brings Vasili Mikdash. And I'm sure there's a reason. And he continues and he says, Yishkun al-Adaleh, building the whole world, not just the base of Mikdash, into his home. And filling that world with his presence is the idea of Yishkun al-Adaleh. The Eibush should rest in it in a way of La'ad, a way that's eternal, that's forever. This is the mandate, basically, that a Yid's job is to serve Hashem in the kind of way that the whole world becomes a Mikdash, Mishkan u'Mikdash le'Yizbarach. Or Mamshich Levaya, and it goes into the particulars. Now, Rabbi, I want you to appreciate what's going on. Basi Legani is a story. Right? I was here, I left, and I came back. There you're good. Nice. Good. But it's a lesson. And the lesson is we have to expand that home to be the whole world. But there's another part of the lesson. And the other part of the lesson is if you want to know how to expand the whole world to be that home, take a sample, like Rabbi Bucket used to say, take a model from the Beis HaMikdash. Hashem told us how to build in the Beis HaMikdash. And he's saying to us, if you want to know how to expand the Beis HaMikdash to encompass the whole world, learn it from the original model. If you study how the Beis HaMikdash was designed and what was done in the Beis HaMikdash, you'll know how to make him this home. And if you know the Basi Legani, there are 3 points made. The first is the Karbanas, the second point is the Afich of Shtus, the Shtus the Kedusha, and the third is the Afich of Sheket, the Kedesh, and the Kesha. And it's very, very strange, because the second example and the third example are talking about building the Beis HaMikdash. The first example is talking about worshipping him within the Beis HaMikdash, and yet the previous Rebbe puts that first. The first thing he brings is Karbanas. And then he brings the taking the Atzei Shitim into Krashim LaMishkan, and then the Mahapach Sheket into Kedesh. It's a little bit of an odd Seder, it's a Tzadach Biyur, but you certainly have 3 messages from the Frierdiker Rebbe. How do you build a home? Study the original Beis HaMikdash and repeat that model. Number 1, Karbanas. Number 2, Hafich of Shtos, the Kedusha. And number 3, Mahapach Sheket, the Kedesh, and the Kesh. And that's what the Rebbe now is going to spell out. Because what the Rebbe does in all the Basi Leganis is each year, he starts from the beginning and he summarizes until he gets to the Perek where he's holding. And then the Rebbe, of course, slows down and studies it. And the previous Rebbe continues to explain, once the Beis HaMikdash is erected and work is being done within it, to affect what is the more important aspect of the Rebbe Tachteinim, like it says in the Mamer from Chav Ches that I just referenced, that this actually brings the Shechina and the Gilui back into this world. That's Karbanis and Keteris. Who the idea of Karbanis is Rosa, the Kurban, oil, Ein Seif. The secret of Karbanis goes up to the secret of Ein Seif. And after it goes up, because the whole idea of a carbon is Ishay, right? Ishay, the fire is going up. And then there's the Reich Nichoyach, that the spirit comes back down. Nachas means to rest. That you make a carbon, you make a sacrifice, and it goes up to Atmos and Mosin Baruch, then it comes back down, the spirit comes back down, and it rests in the Beis HaMikdash, which is Amshach Lamata. The Rebbe has a Sikha, in the Sikha Seir Lamed Beis, where the Rebbe talks about Karbanas. It's a Rashi Sikha. And in that Sikha, the Rebbe argues that the concept of a carbon is without reward, just sacrifice. That's why Dafka by Karbanas it says, most mitzvahs are reciprocal, you give and you get. Karbanas is sacrifice. That's how the Rebbe explained it in Pshutei Shel Mikra. Here the Rebbe says it's Ishe Reich Nicheach. You sacrifice the animal, and then the Shechina comes back down into the world. And of course the animal means the behema, with all the inyanim of what a behema is. Like it says in the Mamer. And then he continues, that was from a review of Perek Beis. Now he reviews Perek Gimel Dal Denei. The Mishkan was made from boards that are called Shittim. Shittim is one of the 10 words for Eres, for cedar. The Gemara says, Asarim Min Yarozim. There's 10 different types of Eres. One of them is Shittim. As the Pasuk says, I think there are 10 different trees. I think. I don't know, but I think. Basi, you have to make the boards of the Mishkan out of wood which is called Shittim. And what is the yin of Shittim, like you have it in the beginning of the Kuntas of Maya and the Bakama Makim, is that Shittim is Lashon Shtus, folly. Folly is a word that's so misleading. It's stupidity. Idiocy, that's what Shtus is. Doing something stupid. People don't like when you say things directly. It's not edel, but it also make sure. I'm a versteht was beret. They tell a story about a chassid who would daven and translate the words in Yiddish, and they told him you're not allowed to be mafsik. He says the behema versteht beser of Mamer, and my animal understands better when I speak the language of my mother tongue. Shtusa means don't be an idiot. Don't be foolish. And taking these boards, which are called shittim, and using the Beis Hamikdash, is the idea of b'mahapach. Shtusel is take the idiocy of the world and using it for Avodas Hashem. This means the Elim have to transform the idiocy of this world. For last, they be meant to make mitkrosh or mishkan boards for the mishkan. And that's a review of Perakim Gimel Daled and Hey. And now goes the review of Perakim's Vav Zayin Ches and Tes. Ukumud Geshgam Deves Keresh. You take these boards called shittim, this wood called shittim, and you make them into boards called keresh. And what is keresh? That's oisi, it's sheker. It's the same letter as the word sheker, which means a lie, like the Rebbe brings from the Zayin. That I man the boy maybe shikr. If a person wants to tell a lie and he wants it to be believed, so he has to say something that shait bekad meisa first, a little bit of truth, and then you could say a lie as big as you want, and people are going to believe it. And in the nimshal, the ois shin is the ace of kedusha. And the Eis is Kuf and Reish are Asven the Sitra Bisha In, they come from Klipa, and the word Sheker is protected by the Shin in the front. And you have to take that word Sheker and take it apart. And be mahapach from Sheker into Keresh into Keshen. As the Friedrich Rebbe explains at length in the Mamer. In Yonam Shleis Yisrael, the concept of these letters. Hein Adem is Lamale, what they mean on high. Hein Ba'Vedas Adom mean Avedas Hashem. What a hay is a kuf is a disfigured hay, and a reish is a disfigured daled, and they have to be transformed. Hanashem Mishekere Elam from the lie of this world. Eisim Krashal Mishkan make boards for the Mishkan. And this is another diuk in the Mamer that they're standing, and standing has two connotations. Number one, the Indian for bittel. And number two, that the makasher hagagim aritzpa, kinyan ha'amudim, like a column, shebechabrim as hamayla mamata, as hamata mal, they connect the lowest level to the highest level. If I'm not mistaken, that's in Perek Ches of the Basi Legani and in the Mamer of Tafshin Yud Ches. If I'm not mistaken, a Mamer of Tafshin Yud Ches. And these columns keep the ceiling and the roof together, and it makes them into a union, into a oneness. So you're taking Kesher and Keresh, you're taking Sheker and make it to Keresh and Kesher. So these are three models of how you make a Dira B'Tachteinim from the original Dira B'Tachteinim, Karbonis, using Shtus Del Yumazeh, which is craziness and extremism for Avodas Hashem, and the Sheker Avela Mazeh to make it into Keresh and Kesher for the Eibishter. The whole Zernas, the effectiveness of this work to make this world Dira B'Tachteinim is achieved. Adei Aveda, it requires work. Shtus the Kedusha. Shtus the Kedusha means you have to be holy crazy in holiness, to go out all limitations. Mesidus Nefesh. Shtus the Kedusha, but this is the bread and butter Rabbi Lubavitcher Chassid, and it's the mandate of our generation based on this Mamer. Shazui Ha'aveda Shalaman B'Tavodas, it's serving Hashem by the way to the above reason. This is the first half of the Basi Legani, which is what is the task. Hashem was here, he left and he returned, but our job is to expand the whole world and make it into his home. Then comes the second half. Who does it? And this is the beginning of chapter 10. Who does this work? Is Aidei B'nei Yisrael, to the Jewish people, Shenekram B'Shem, Tzivas Hashem. They're called the Tzivas Hashem. Umam Shech Levai B'Emek Yeser. The Rebbe proceeds to explain more deeply why Yidna called Tzivas Hashem. And this is already chapters 11 and 12, what I explained to you before, that there's a Melchemes Nitzachin where the king gets personally involved in Vazbas Kol HaEitzres. The purpose of an army, the idea of an army, the idea of soldiers, is through soldiers you can go out and fight a war. A king can fight a war by himself. He can have all the will in the world, all the determination in the world. He needs soldiers. But to be victorious. We see in the world, in government, that the need to be victorious, the determination and the will to win at all costs, touches the king very deeply. There's a whole discussion in Chassidus, where you have in the Basi Legani also that Midas HaNetzach goes to the very essence of a person. And the Chayre doesn't only mean Netzach, it means Nihi. Right? The lowest Midas are the most visceral, they're the most atzmistic. Willpower is no limit. The determination to win at all costs, Midas HaNetzach, is infinite. Nobody has a greater Midas HaNetzach than a king. Because nobody's more in touch with his neshama than a king is. Because the king has been lifted by the people to be connected to something which of his own, within himself, which is the deepest and the highest. So kings have a willpower and have a determination that allows them to fight almost without any limit. Much more than the generals can fight. People quit. It's too hard, it's too expensive, it's too risky, it's too uncertain. But a king has a Midas HaNetzach which doesn't let him quit. Because it's who he is. And the king is the Eibshter. And in a more immediate way, the king is the Rebbe, the Nasi Ador. They have the determination to fight this fight and see it through until the end and not let anything stop them. And as a result of this, Achakol is all the treasure. Hein Masha Atzbas, both that he collected himself. Hein Masha Atzbas as well what his ancestors collected. Shem Yekodim, they're so precious. Achafilu Marames, they're not even shown. They're certainly not used. When you have a war, which is called the Melchemes, you have to win at all costs. So first of all, the king doesn't leave it to the generals, he personally gets involved. I've told this to you times before, that they have a Reshima. It's very hard to understand this. There's a Reshima from the Friedrich Rebbe, where he's writing down what his father said, and amongst the things his father said is that he's hoping that the king of Russia gets involved in the First World War. The Russians are fighting with the Germans. And the Rebbe Rashab hated the Germans, literally the Alter Rebbe hated Napoleon. He saw Kaiser Wilhelm II as an apocadus, which he was. And of course all of us also understand that World War I is a segue to the tragedy of World War II. Not that World War I wasn't a tragedy. And the Rebbe says he hopes that the Melech, the case is Chareinling. And he did. And he was so inept. That's the thing which is hard to... He's a terrible general. He was clueless. He took over control of the army and he buried them. He went to the front. He didn't know what to do and how to do. It's nicht verstanden. But the Rebbe wanted him involved. And the Rebbe didn't want him involved because he thought he was such a smart guy. The Rebbe wanted him involved, the Rebbe Rashab, because he knew that when the king goes, the Malach of Russia goes. And he was hoping that if the king gets personally involved and the Malach of Russia goes, there'll be a Midas HaNetzach which will bring to victory. He wanted the Germans to lose at all costs. And they won. They didn't. The Germans lost the war, but they won in Russia. It was a separate peace, and it set the stage for the Bolsheviks, which were even a bigger curse than the Tsars, although the Tsars were no lovers of Jews either. So the Rebbe Rashab said, I hope the king gets involved. And he explained it, because if the king of Russia, the Tsar, Nikolai the Zweiter, the second Nicholas, would have gotten involved, the Malach of Russia would have been on the front, and there'd be a greater Midas HaNetzach, and there'd be a greater possibility that Russia would win. That's what the Rebbe Rashab hoped for. And he did get involved, and unfortunately they did lose. But there is this Midas HaNetzach. And a part of this Midas HaNetzach is this Indian of Bizbaz HaEitzres. To win a war, so the king opens up his treasure, and dispenses of it recklessly. He splurges it, he gives it away irresponsibly. It's given to the generals. You see this in the later Perakim, Yitches and Yites. For the foot soldier, like I explained before, it's all for the sake of winning the war. So this is now discussing not what the mandate is, but who fulfills the mandate. This is the Tzivis Hashem. But the king stands with them. And I think you see this by Rabbi Seinu, the Rabbeim, the Rebbe used to say, the Frierdiker Rebbe used to say, that the Inyan of a Rebbe is Chassidus, Primis HaTorah, not Chdorim and not Yeshivas, and certainly not other things, whatever it is, Mikveh Tara, all the things that Rebbe got involved with, Kashrus. But Rebbe's Inyan is Primis HaTorah. For that you have Rabbonim, for that you have Askonim. Why is the Rebbe getting involved with all of these things? Because there's a Mochamas Nitzachim. And now the smallest thing becomes the Rebbe's business. And in addition to his personal involvement, he gives out the treasure, which in our form is the Maimori Chassidus and the Sichas of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe, the Torah, Atzuma, which has been revealed in our generation, so long as we should win the war. The Rebbe once said that the Frierdiker Rebbe Sichas is the ultimate business of Eitzes, because people don't even realize how great it is, how important it is. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe continues in Perek Beis. We have to understand what it means, the treasure on high. And for some reason, of the 3 points that he makes, the king engages in the battle personally. Mevazbis called the Eitzes, he dispenses of the treasure recklessly. And the most painful of all, he throws away his own life. Of the 3 ideas, the one that gets the most attention is the middle one. To explain this treasure. Magdim. So the previous Rebbe prefaced much kosta bezeir, but tikkun zeir. What's written in Zeir and tikkun zeir. If you look in footnote 23, you see that there's a zeir chodesh. Right? The Frierdiker Rebbe says tikkun zeir. The Rebbe adds bezeir, and this is the zeir chodesh. And this is the quote. Godliness ascends upwards beyond an end. And it descends below beyond the purpose. And of course, here it says only once, Lamaila, right? And a lot of times, Lamaila, Maila adin kates, Lamata mata adin tachlis. I think this is the original quote, Lamaila adin kates, Lamata adin tachlis. And the ultimate end is, and you look at footnote 24, Messiah to Perek Yudzayin, Sha'in Lamaila adin kates is Eitzer. That Oitzer ha'elyon is not the idea that godliness is revealed, or the godness which is revealed. The Eitzer ha'elyon is the idea that godliness is hidden, or the godliness which is the madrega of hiddenness. Like I explained at length in my introduction to this class, and we're going to see it in the Mamer. I'm just going to finish learning. This shiur is only on the introduction. That's all it is. In order to understand in great breadth, and great depth, how awesome is the idea of Lamaila and Kates, which is, like I said, the Rebbe said last year, Tafshich Daled, that the Seder is, in the words of the Zeir, first it says Lamaila and Kates, then it says Lamata Adein Tachlis. But when the Frierdiker Rebbe explains it, he first explains the second part, Lamata Adein Tachlis, and then Lamaila and Kates. Why? Because in order to understand Lamaila and Kates, and Lamaila and Kates is higher than Lamata Adein Tachlis. That says that the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mamer also, that it's higher. But the previous Rebbe reverses the order and explains first in the last Perakim Yud Beis Yud Gimel and Yud Daled, the great idea of godliness coming down Adein Tachlis, which is Bechin as the Spashas Bechin is Saint Safe. The idea that godliness, because of what godliness is unstoppable. It's manifest everywhere. Bechin is Saint Safe without an end, and Lamata Mata lower and even lower. In the kind of way, no matter where it goes, even into klipas, even to pare. It's in a state of ain't safe that ultimately you could see symptoms of it. And the Rebbe concludes, that's how great it is. So first you explain the notion that godliness is available to everybody, everywhere. And it segues into the notion that godliness is available to nobody, nowhere. Because both of those characteristics define what godliness is. I like to say that that's what Chassidus is. Ask anybody what Chassidus is. Everybody has some idea and no one has a clue. Because it's the Selbe Zach. It's Inyan Atzmi. Like the Moshe of Shemen. It's everywhere. And it's nowhere. It's soft. You can't have it. Like the Rebbe says in the Sichas, you can only eat oil with other food. You can't eat it by itself. But what is the Shamnunis? Everybody knows it and nobody has a clue. It's Lamata Adein Tachlis, everybody knows it. Lamata Adein Kates, no one has a clue. But the Rebbe is explaining that it's not just 2 ideas in one Inyan, it's actually 2 madregas. That the Lamata Adein Kates, and I think this is more in next year's Mamer than it is in this year's Mamer, is not just the concept that Hashem could hide It's the concept of the hiddenness of Hashemliness, which is a higher Hashemliness, higher Elokus than the revelation of Hashemliness. But as I said to you in my introduction, this is really more next year's Mamer than this year's Mamer. Begins to explain the idea that godliness is beyond any world and beyond anybody's knowledge. And the Rebbe says, that's a higher idea from the idea of godliness being known by everybody. And again, I want to repeat that in the discussion of Lama'ala Dein Kates, there are two Perakim, Perek Tezvav, which is this year's Perek, and Perek Tezayin, which is Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach V'Yishalom B'Briyas Hanachayna V'Ashleimo B'Simcha U'La'achrei B'Yas Mashiach Tzidkeinu. Next year's Perek, Perek Tezayin, explains the Lama'ala Dein Kates idea. And in this year is really explaining Lama'ala Dein Kates not in terms of the level of godliness, which is Lama'ala Dein Kates, but the concept of tzimtzum. That creation is about Hashem hiding himself, and that's a Keich Ein Seifi. And in next year's Perek, he's going to bring the higher idea of Lama'ala Dein Kates, the godliness of hiddenness. And then the Rebbe finishes. Later on, the Rebbe says, in the later Perakim means Perek Yud Zayin and Yud Ches and Yud Tes. That this idea of Lama'ala Dein Kates, which is considered higher than the idea of Lama'ala Dein Tachas, that's the treasure. Because treasure means something which is hidden. And Lama'ala Dein Kates is hidden. That even the levels of godliness, which is Lama'ala Dein Kates, which is the Eibishter's ability to hide, and the Eibishter in the state of hiddenness. So this also is given to the soldiers. It's not just given in a conventional way. Bizbul is given in a way of recklessness and generosity. Because the war has to be what at all costs, and this is a mechames nitzachen. This itself adds further proof at kama inyan hanitzachen, to what extent the concept of a victory touches the king. How important it is to the Melech to win at all costs. We just learned the first 2 pages and a little bit of this Mamer, which is only the introduction. It's the introduction to the Mamer. Now the reason it took us over an hour is because I spent a half an hour overviewing the whole Mamer. And we're going to stop now, Mitzvah Hashem. And then the next 3 shiurim, the next 2 shiurim are on the concept of tzimtzum, really. This is an interesting Mamer. And it's really more about Hashem hiding than it is the Hashemliness of hiddenness, of Yossi B'Seisa, And I think that's more next year, like I said. Okay, we'll continue, Mr. Hashem. Good Shabbos. A good Erev Shabbat.